You're not tired from doing too much. You're tired from waiting and not knowing what you're waiting for. 3 weeks of it. The sense that something is finishing, but nothing is closed. You expect each morning to be different. It isn't. There is a reason. And tonight it reaches its exact point. Since February 20th, Saturn and Neptune have been sitting together at 0 degrees Aries for the first time in 36 years. That alignment has been dissolving structure, the kind that gives your days their shape and your decisions their weight. On February 26th, Mercury turned backward through Pisces, pulling your mind into loops of unfinished things. Tomorrow night, March 18th, at 9:23 p.m. Eastern, a new moon forms at 28 degrees Pisces, the last degree of the last sign in the zodiac. But that's not what makes 9:23 p.m. tomorrow different from any other new moon. 28 degrees Pisces is not a beginning, it's a seam. The exact point where one system ends and the next hasn't started. What actually happens at that seam, and what to do in the hours before it closes, is not what most people tonight are focused on. In the next few minutes, you'll discover 3 things. First, what the seam at 28 degrees Pisces is, and why this specific degree matters tonight. Second, why Saturn, Neptune, and Mercury, moving backward together, locked into exactly the 3 weeks you've been carrying. Third, 3 steps time to 9:23 p.m. Not to start something, but to let the 0 do its work. The waiting you've been feeling had a shape. Tonight, that shape closes. The feeling doesn't have a name. That's the first thing. Not anxiety. Anxiety has an object, something it points at. Not grief. Grief knows what it's mourning. What you've been carrying is quieter and less defined than either. It's the sense of waiting for something to finish when you can't identify what's finishing. You wake in the morning and the first thought is already there. Something is unresolved. You don't know what. You move through the obvious candidates, a decision, a relationship, a situation, and none of them quite fit. The feeling doesn't lift. There is a decision you've been sitting with for 3 weeks, not from fear. More like the timing isn't right yet, though you couldn't explain to anyone why. You've tried to describe this state to someone close. You had a shape of what you wanted to say, and then the words weren't there. You said something approximate and moved on. The heaviness isn't in your body exactly. It isn't in your thinking exactly. It sits somewhere between the two. This has a neurobiological explanation that has nothing to do with character. Daniel Kahneman's research on cognition identified 2 operating modes in the brain. System 1, which runs automatically on pattern and prior experience, and System 2, which handles deliberate reasoning for new situations. Under chronic fatigue, the kind built from weeks of unresolved suspension, not days of hard work, System 2 progressively loses access. What stays active is System 1, reflexes, repetition, familiar loops. The reason you haven't moved this decision isn't weakness. It's a documented shift in which part of the brain currently has the controls. The phase you're in has an official astronomical classification, balsamic moon, defined as the period when the moon has closed to within 45 degrees of angular distance from the sun before their next conjunction. At that geometry, less than 3% of the moon's visible disk reflects light toward Earth. Tonight, that number is below 3%. The word balsamic entered astronomical language through medieval Arabic star catalogs, borrowed from the Greek valsamon, balsamon, the resin that seeps from a wound in the hours before it seals. The Babylonian astronomers who compiled the Enuma Anu Enlil, cuneiform tablets from roughly 1000 BCE, recorded this phase separately. They called it Bubbly, the day of the moon's absence. The old form has departed. The new one has not arrived, not ending, not beginning, the interval between. That is where you are tonight, tomorrow night at 9:23 p.m. Eastern. In less than 20 hours, this phase closes. Not the waiting itself, the shape that made the waiting feel exactly like this. This didn't start tonight. There's a specific date when this shape formed. Once you have it, 3 weeks of suspension stops being shapeless. The date is February 20th, 2026, 11:53 a.m. Eastern. Saturn and Neptune reached exact conjunction at 0 degrees 45 minutes of Aries, two planets at the same point in the sky for the first time in 36 years. The previous conjunction was in 1989. This one lands differently, for a reason that connects to what you've been feeling. Saturn is structure, not ambition. Structure. The scaffolding of daily life, the role you inhabit each morning before you've thought about it, the routine that gives your decisions their weight, the definition of yourself you operate from without questioning. Neptune is dissolution, the process by which defined things become permeable. Together they don't produce collapse, they produce uncertainty inside what was solid. Your days still function. They just don't hold the same shape they did. Since February 20th, the structures giving your days their form have been losing definition, gradually. The way something familiar stops feeling like yours. But where this conjunction landed matters as much as the conjunction itself. 0 degrees Aries is the first degree of the entire zodiac, the 0 point of the whole system. In traditional astrological practice, this carries a specific designation, the Aries point, also called the world point. Configurations here move beyond individual birth charts and begin operating collectively, not amplifying personal charts, but exiting them. Saturn and Neptune met at the coordinate from which everything else is measured. The last time they met at this exact degree of Aries was 1702, 324 years ago. 4 days later, February 26th, Mercury stationed retrograde at 22 degrees 33 minutes of Pisces. Mercury governs how the mind sequences and closes. Pisces is the sign where Mercury operates in what classical astrology calls debilitation, where its core function is most compromised. In Pisces, the capacity for clear closure softens, thoughts circle, decisions lose their edges. After 50, cortisol drops significantly past midnight, removing the buffer that suppresses the brain from replaying unresolved material. The hippocampus returns to open loops precisely when external stimulation is lowest. 3 weeks of Mercury retrograde in Pisces maps almost exactly onto that pattern. There is something you were close to deciding before February 20th, a direction almost ready. Since then, it has circled without landing. 2 configurations, 4 days apart, 1 state. Mercury has been holding that loop open since February 26th. In less than 20 hours, at 9:23 p.m. Eastern, it stands beside the moon for the first time since it turned back. That loop has a closing point, but Saturn and Neptune are the background. Mercury is what kept the loop running. Tomorrow, a third element arrives, not a planet alone, but a specific coordinate where 3 bodies converge and the zodiac runs out of degrees. Babylonian astronomers had a precise word for that point, and it names exactly what you've been waiting inside. Most people know that a new moon begins a cycle, a fresh lunar month, a point of initiation. That's accurate, but not this one. Tomorrow's new moon forms at 28 degrees 26 minutes of Pisces. Pisces is the 12th and final sign of the zodiac. The new moon after tomorrow falls in Aries, the first sign, a completely different element and nature. This means tomorrow is not simply opening a new lunar month, it is the last reset before the zodiac completes a full rotation. 360 degrees close at 28 degrees 26 minutes. The next coordinate is 0 degrees 0 minutes Aries. Between those 2 points, there is nothing, only the seam. That seam is where 9:23 p.m. Eastern lands tomorrow night. The classical term for 28 and 29 degrees of any sign is the anaretic degree, the final cluster before a sign ends, associated with urgency and completion rather than initiation. At this degree, the quality of the sign has nowhere left to go. What is unfinished here does not carry forward smoothly. It either closes or it waits another full cycle. But the degree alone doesn't explain what makes tomorrow's moment exact. At 9:23 p.m., 3 bodies occupy the same region of sky simultaneously: the Moon, Mercury retrograde, and Mars. Each has been a separate source of what you've been carrying. Mercury retrograde, the mind in a loop of unresolved things, unable to sequence forward. Mars in Pisces is in what classical astrology calls debilitation. Mars governs will and directed action, and Pisces is the sign where will loses traction. not from weakness, but from the nature of the element. Water doesn't respond to force. For 3 weeks, you've been trying to move something that doesn't move that way. The moon gathers Mercury and Mars together at the exact moment of zero illumination. 3 sources, 1 coordinate, 1 moment. The last time Saturn and Neptune were in active conjunction and a new moon fell in Pisces simultaneously. That did not occur in 1989. That year's Saturn-Neptune conjunction was in Capricorn. The Pisces new moon of that cycle fell without those 2 planets nearby. The convergence present tomorrow, an active 36-year cycle at the Aries point, a new moon at the final degrees of the zodiac, and a triple conjunction of Moon, Mercury, and Mars, has no equivalent within a single human lifetime. Right now, as you hear this, the moon is already moving through the last degrees of Pisces at roughly half a degree per hour. The distance to 28 degrees 26 minutes is shrinking while you listen. The Enuma Anu Enlil tablets recorded separate observations for these final degrees, what they called the threshold without a master, the old quality of the sign already gone, the new one not yet arrived. A state between systems, not transition, gap. Tomorrow at 9:23 p.m. Eastern, that threshold closes. Where it opens in your life, which area has been carrying this weight, depends on where you stand. For 4 signs, the pressure has been landing in one specific area. If you recognize yourself in one of them, you'll understand not just what is closing, but where it has been sitting all along. 4 signs are feeling this most directly. Not because they were selected, because the geometry requires it. When a new moon forms at 28 degrees Pisces, it activates what traditional astrology calls the mutable cross, the 4 signs that stand in exact 90-degree and 180-degree relationships to that point. Pisces, Virgo, Gemini, Sagittarius, conjunction, opposition, square. These are angular relationships, not interpretations. The pressure lands in each through a specific house, a specific area of life. And Mercury retrograde has been running its loop in that same area for 3 weeks. Pisces. The new moon falls in your first house, the house of identity, body, and self-definition. What has been dissolving is not a circumstance, it is a version of yourself. The role that gave your days their shape, professional, partner, parent, has been shifting, and the replacement hasn't arrived. The question underneath isn't what to do next, it's who is making the decision. If you've been waking before 4 a.m. with that specific blankness, not fear, just the absence of a clear answer to who you are now, this is where it has been sitting. Virgo. The opposition, the new moon, lands directly across your chart in your 7th house. Long-term partnership, the significant relationship that mirrors you. Something in that dynamic has been losing definition since February. You may already know what it is. What hasn't happened yet is saying it plainly, to yourself, or aloud. The loop Mercury has been running in this house is precisely that, the thing you keep approaching without completing. Gemini, the square. Pressure falls in your 10th house. Career, public role, how the world registers you. What you do professionally may still function, but something between you and that work changed, and the outer version of you hasn't caught up with the inner shift. It's not failure. It's the gap between what you present and what you've actually become. That gap has been widening since February. Sagittarius, the 2nd square. This lands in your 4th house, foundation, home, family structure, the ground you expected to hold steady. The pressure comes from below, from exactly where support was assumed to be. The structure is shifting in ways you didn't initiate and can't fully stop. The weight isn't grief exactly. It's the specific discomfort of realizing the floor is different from what it was. For every other sign, find which house in your natal chart contains 28 degrees Pisces. That house is where the seam opened 3 weeks ago. That is where the loop has been running. That is where 9:23 p.m. tomorrow lands for you specifically. Whatever house this is, it has been under pressure since February 20th. In less than 20 hours at 9:23 p.m. Eastern, that pressure reaches its exact closing point. What happens in the hours before is the only part still open. Knowing where the pressure lands is not the same as doing something with it. There is a window between now and 9:23 p.m. It is not empty. Your body is already inside it. You are already inside the window, not because you decided to be, because the window doesn't require a decision. The moon is at its minimum illumination. The cycle that opened February 20th has been narrowing toward this point for 26 days. Right now, as you hear this, the moon is somewhere in the final degrees of Pisces, moving toward 28 degrees 26 minutes at roughly half a degree per hour. The closing point is less than a day away. You are inside the last hours of a 36-year cycle, whether you do anything about it or not. Your body knows this before your thinking does. The balsamic moon phase affects circadian biology through a mechanism that has nothing to do with belief. Before artificial light, moonlight was a primary regulator of nocturnal activity. At minimum illumination, the ambient light available for melatonin suppression drops to its lowest point in the monthly cycle. The body shifts into a state consistent with completion rather than initiation. Lower stimulation, higher melatonin, reduced drive toward new action. This is chronobiology, not interpretation. If you've been waking between 2 and 4 in the morning over the past 2 weeks with a thought already in motion, the same unresolved thing returning without permission, there is a physiological component to that. After 50, cortisol levels drop significantly in the hours past midnight. Cortisol normally acts as a buffer, suppressing the default mode network from cycling through unfinished material. Without that buffer, in the low-stimulation environment of a balsamic moon night, the brain replays open loops with clarity and persistence. It is not anxiety. It is a brain in completion mode, returning to what hasn't been completed. The Babylonian astronomers who recorded the Enuma Anu Enlil, cuneiform tablets held today in the British Museum's K collection, compiled across several centuries beginning around 1000 BCE, documented the Bubuli phase with a specific operational note. Decisions reached before this phase tended to hold. Decisions made during it were frequently revisited after the new moon. Their record wasn't mystical, it was observational, a pattern noted across enough cycles to be written into the tablets as a rule. Mars in Pisces adds a third layer. Mars is the planet of will and directed action. In Pisces, classical debilitation, Mars does not respond to force. The sign's element is water, and water doesn't compress. For 3 weeks, your will has been meeting resistance not because the direction was wrong, but because the mechanism wasn't suited to the conditions. Mars in Pisces is effective through one action only: stopping, setting something down, allowing what is already in motion to complete without being pushed. Tomorrow night, at 9:23 p.m. Eastern, Mars stands beside the Moon and Mercury at the exact closing coordinate. The planet of action, in the sign where action works only as release, at the moment of zero illumination, at the final degree of the final sign. That is not a combination that calls for effort. It calls for 3 specific things, each time to a precise moment in the hours ahead. Not to open anything, to close what is already closing, with enough presence to register that it closed. 3 steps, each tied to a specific moment in the hours ahead. None of them require preparation or belief. They require paper, a pen, and the willingness to stop at a precise time. The first step, before 9:23 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, any time before, including now. Take a piece of paper and a pen, not a phone, not a keyboard. The hand moving across paper activates the motor cortex in a way typing does not, and that activation deepens how the brain encodes what is written as complete. James Pennebaker's research at the University of Texas, across multiple documented trials, established that expressive writing about unresolved experience measurably reduces the frequency of intrusive thought and closes open narrative loops. Write in continuous prose, not a list, not bullet points. What is ending, not what you want next, not a plan, only what is already going, even if you can't name it precisely. Write around it. Write what it feels like in the morning. Write the decision that hasn't closed, 1 full page minimum. Don't stop to edit. Don't reread while writing. Saturn and Neptune have been dissolving structure since February 20th. Dissolution without record leaves the sensation of loss without the signal of completion. The writing gives the brain what it needs to stop replaying, a fixed external record of what has been witnessed. The second step, exactly 9:23 p.m. Eastern, March 18th. Set a reminder before this video ends. At 9:23 p.m., stop completely. Put down whatever you're holding. No phone, no music, no background. 3 minutes of silence. Exactly 3. Sitting or standing, eyes open or closed, none of that matters. Do nothing. At that moment, the Moon, Mercury, and Mars occupy one coordinate, 28 degrees 26 minutes of Pisces. This conjunction lasts only a few minutes. 3 minutes of stillness is not meditation. It is the body registering a transition rather than moving through it without noticing. The nervous system under chronic stress needs a full stop to mark a boundary. Without the stop, the moment passes and the loop has no closing point, only continuation. The third step, immediately after the 3 minutes, before you open your phone, before you speak, write one sentence about what is ending. No names, no details, no explanation for anyone else. One sentence with a verb. Something like, "The version of me that needed this to resolve is done." But your words, about your thing. 2 lines at most. Neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman at UCLA documented in 2007 that single-sentence effective labeling, naming an emotional state in one brief phrase, measurably reduces amygdala activation and returns regulatory function to the prefrontal cortex. Details interfere. They pull the brain back into analysis rather than closure. One sentence is the boundary. After it, the brain registers the narrative as complete. The loop Mercury has been running since February 26th receives a closing point, not from the planets alone, but from the only system that can actually close it, the one inside you. What follows is not relief, not clarity, not the feeling you've been waiting for. The new moon passed at 9:23 p.m. The cycle that has been active since February 20th is now dark. There's nothing left to wait for tonight. What remains is quiet, not peaceful, just empty in a way that's different from 3 weeks ago. In 36 hours, something that has been pressing against your thinking begins to move. What couldn't resolve, couldn't close, couldn't come clear, that part is almost through. The next day is already different from this one. Subscribe and stay close. What comes next in this sequence is not separate from tonight.